The Syntax of Things by Arisha, Chapter 64, parentheses, Avada-Kedavra.
Money?
Check.
Permissions?
Check.
My notebook?
What do we need that for, Hermione?
Ron protested. To study, perhaps? I'm not going to waste all my day buying sweets. In case you haven't noticed, there is a test.
Check.
Scarves?
Choose my thought, Ron muttered to Harry before turning to Hermione and nodding. Hermione folded her alarmingly long list of everything they'd need for the excursion and tucked it into the bag Ron was holding.
Let's go.
Harry, who was slumped face down on Ron's bed, took hold of Ron's elbow and pulled himself up. The weather's terrible, he complained. I think I'll pass.
The weather's fine, and you're coming, Hermione announced as a matter of fact. I didn't cancel my arithmancy session for nothing. Up!
Harry complied, the concept of coffee at Hogwarts sounding more appealing than ever. He should really start a petition. He followed his friends to the common room, almost tripping over his untied shoelace as he climbed down the narrow stairs. Someone called his name, and he looked around confusedly, seeing no one.
Over here!
Neville's voice said. Harry located him behind an enormous mountain of books, stacked all over a small table next to the window. Neville was crouched over a parchment so long it reached the ground. Hey, said Harry. Who did you piss off?
Myself, mostly, groaned Neville, but also Professor Sprout. I told her I know all about magical plants, and she said arrogance is the death of man. So now I have to write a 4-foot-long composition on the history of Snargle of Roots and hand it over by tomorrow.
Sounds like the death of fun, Harry said. So you're not joining us?
Sure thing, Neville replied. Just hold on while I pick up and carry my 35 books of sources, will you?
Don't forget your 3-mile-long scroll, too,
Harry added, digging into his pockets to count his sickles.
Tell you what, I'll bring you a couple of sugar quills and some chocolate balls, okay?
Neville gaped. You really don't have to...
Yeah, I do. See you,
said Harry, patting Neville's back and then running off to Ron and Hermione before Neville could voice any protests. Thanks, Harry! Neville called, and Harry smiled. The fat lady had given up on asking for the password, as so many students were rushing in and out, some looking for their friends and some simply strolling around. Weekends were always calm like that. McGonagall had already escorted the younger students to the gates, and Hermione didn't miss the chance to complain about how they were 5 whole minutes late. Both Harry and Ron simply nodded their heads through her scolding, and as soon as they exited the common room, Harry challenged Ron to a running contest and had them both panting and pushing each other by the time they reached the gates. Hermione caught up with them a minute later, rolled her eyes at the sight of both of them acting like demented children, and chose to talk with Ginny instead, obviously determined to convince herself that she didn't know them at all. Ron, on the other hand, kept glancing at her, even as they waited for McGonagall's mandatory sensory charm. Despite having no prohibited items on him, Harry shivered when the charm hit him. He smiled at McGonagall awkwardly, hoping she wouldn't ask for his permission form. It was surely somewhere in the bottom of his trunk or maybe under his bed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen it. Mr. Potter, she greeted him curtly.
Good morning, Professor,
said Harry, and felt impossibly relieved when after a moment she moved on to Lavender and her friends. A few meters behind them, Slughorn was inspecting the Slytherins in a similar manner, although he seemed much more cheerful and energetic than McGonagall. Snape was nowhere to be seen. Harry was about to say something when he noticed that Ron's attention was still on Hermione, who was now laughing with Ginny and Parvati.
Stalker,
Harry said, but Ron didn't even hear him.
Oi!
Harry tried again, but to no avail. All right, then. Harry grinned, leaning toward Ron and putting into effect his best Umbridge voice. Harry whispered right into his ear. Ron almost jumped up, blinking back into reality. It turned to Harry horrified, his face so pale as though he'd just been through a million war flashbacks. My God! Aubrey! He exclaimed. Harry shrugged innocently.
Want me to leave you two alone when we get there?
He asked. Ron shook his head. Of course not. You wouldn't notice anyway.
She does, you know. The problem is that she's just as stubborn as you are.
She's not stubborn. She's dangerous, and Ginny's corrupting her with stories about her love life. He pointed his head at them, and Harry rolled his eyes.
Shouldn't you be more concerned about other girls corrupting your sister instead of the other way around?
Ron merely had time to frown in dread before Hermione interrupted them. Have you two finished behaving like vulgar tramps? She asked as the gate doors finally opened for them to pass. You shouldn't speak like that to the chosen one and his chosen friend.
Harry groaned. In all honesty, Harry, you deserve it. And look at what you're wearing. You're going to catch a cold, Ron. You too. Walking to Hogsmeade was a blast. Hermione forced a scarf around Harry's neck, and it almost choked him as she adjusted it. The room was filled with students chatting and shouting. Colorful sparks hovered over their heads as their wands acted up in joy. Soon the village's small houses came into sight. A group of bleary shapes they were, abstract and oddly curious. When Harry and his friends reached the high street, it was simply lovely. Eccentric and yet so eerie, with its inns and taverns with their pointy roofs and crooked chimneys.
Where's Snape? Harry asked suddenly, the question falling out of his lips before he could help it.
Oh, knows? Who cares? Said Ron.
Why? You reckon he's up to something?
He's busy with our assignments, probably, Hermione suggested, but Harry was not convinced. He's freaked out, was all he could think of.
Yeah, he said. It's just that, he should be supervising instead of Slughorn. It's a bit weird.
More than weird it was, and Harry suspected that he knew the answer. Snape had already regretted it. Sobered up and in his right mind again, he'd want nothing to do with Harry now. He'd hate himself for starting it, and he'd hate Harry even more for giving in. Whatever seizure Snape was experiencing because of him this time, though, didn't matter. They'd figure it out together. It'd be fine. He knew Snape would react like this. He was just hoping he wouldn't. The outcome of what happened between them would be final one way or another. Snape would either cut him off permanently, or he'd give this a go. Wherever it may lead them. All for the best, Ron said. Hogsmeade looks better without his face in it. Harry smiled at his feet, his fists tightly clutched into his pockets. Despite the cold, the wind was quite bearable. The shops were all loud and busy, and the trio hurried into Honeydukes to buy their first candies of the year. Hermione was hardly enthusiastic at first. Her parents disapproved of sweets, she said, although she eventually gave up and purchased a colorful nougat with goblin candies on top. She very obviously loved it, even though she refused to admit it. Harry bought a box of choco balls for himself and another for Neville. When Hermione suggested that they have tea at Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, Ron insisted that they go to the Three Broomsticks instead.
Why do we always argue about where we're going to sit, and then we always end up here?
Asked Harry as he loosened his scarf and dropped into a chair. The cozy atmosphere of the inn was something he had deeply missed. The smell of ale and pumpkin stew filled his nostrils, and he breathed it in longingly.
Seriously, though,
said Ron, rubbing his hands together to warm them up. The Three Broomsticks was literally your idea, Hermione told him.
Because it's the best pub in Hogsmeade, isn't it?
And not because of Madame Rosemerta's light clothing, Hermione muttered. Ron smiled at her guiltily, but didn't respond. Harry ordered butterbeer for his friends and a glass of foaming gilly water for himself. What happened to you? Hermione narrowed her eyes as she took a sip of her butterbeer. I thought you hated gilly water.
Actually, Harry said, ready to swallow a large sip of it, I never tried it before, and I'm curious to do so.
Gulping the strange green liquid down, Harry maintained his dignity for a few seconds, and then he grimaced in disgust. He could feel his throat glistering and his tongue going numb, but he beamed widely as Hermione took it from his hands and rolled her eyes before trying it too. It's tolerable, she said after a moment in an unconvincingly casual voice.
It's pretty awesome, actually. Delicious if you're an octopus or something. It's probably the squid's favorite drink.
Harry passed it to Ron, who added suspiciously.
You're remarkably cheerful today, mate,
Ron said as he smelled the contents of the glass. Harry felt warm around the ears and neck, and in the light of the morning, he knew that he had turned bright red. He hastily gulped his drink and shrugged, looking at everywhere but Ron.
Why not? I mean, it's our first trip of the year.
The professors arrived at the pub soon after, dividing into smaller groups and proceeding to occupy several tables. It was Hagrid who came to greet them first, before sitting with Dumbledore and McGonagall by the counter at the other end of the room. Flitwick and Sprout sat together, saving a seat for Slughorn, who ignored them ostentatiously and sat with a group of sixth-year students instead.
You think Zonko's might open again?
Asked Ron. I doubt it, Hermione said. It's the first sign of war, quite literally. They don't want people to laugh.
Fred and George are doing a great job with the shop. You should see Mum's face when they first showed her their brochure.
They're attracting attention, Hermione said. I mean, the shop is a great idea, but the timing is just terrible. The Ministry has little tolerance for mockery these days. Hermione glanced at Dumbledore, and Harry followed her eyes to see him show something to McGonagall on a newspaper. They were too far away for Harry to make out the front page clearly, but it couldn't be anything but the prophet. Hagrid banged his hand on the table as they talked, furious about something. "Muggle disappearances again," Ron guessed.
"It's unnerving the more you think about it."
Hermione picked at her butterbeer's foam with a finger.
"Everybody is so painfully aware of what's going on, but no one cares enough to protect the Muggles. Even Blair knows."
"What Bear?"
"Blair, Ron, Blair, our minister. And before you ask, no, he's not a bear."
Ron tried another sip of Harry's gillyweed, this time audibly gagging as he gulped. "Well, you don't expect him to tell them anything, do you? They think he's mental."
"He should at least inform the people that there is some kind of danger out there, even if he can't tell them the details. The statute of secrecy is supposed to protect both sides, not only wizards."
"The statute was signed merely for our benefit, I think," Ron told her. "I mean, we are the ones burdened with the truth. On the Muggle side, only a bear knows."
"It's inexcusable,"
Hermione insisted, her hands tightly clutched around her beer glass.
"If anyone—"
"There's something I need to tell you," Harry blurted out abruptly, "but I don't know how you're going to react."
Hermione gave him a sudden look of deep concern, which Harry knew too well, but he refused to think about what was behind it. The fact that his news was always miserable should make it expected that his friends feared for the worse with every beginning of an announcement. But Harry didn't have bad news to share, quite the opposite perhaps. He damned his own silly happiness to refuse to let him keep the secret anymore. He had to tell them. He had to, or he'd burst. His friends stared at him. Harry stared back. He didn't know how to begin, or if he even should. Part of him felt jealous at the thought of other people knowing. He was terrified, he realized. He feared the reaction. He feared they'd be appalled. He feared they'd try to take this away from him.
"What is it?" Ron asked.
"Is something wrong?"
No, nothing's wrong. It's just that..." He rubbed his forehead with a hand, taking a deep breath. "It's about my summers. Do you remember how... after Sirius died, I...
He bit his lip, determined to stop babbling.
"Last night,
A loud bang was heard as the sky darkened. There was a scream, and then a group of students dashed through the front door, wands in hand. Another shuddering sound followed as Madame Rosemurder dropped the drink she was holding. Her jaw dropped in shock, and Dumbledore stood up. "The Dark Mark!" a student gasped. "It's above us!" For a moment there was deadly silence. Then someone screamed, and people began pushing their way out of the pub hurriedly. A table was flipped over, and Madame Rosemurder drew her wand. Harry stood up at once, taking out his wand too, just as Ron and Hermione did the same.
"Professor!"
yelled Harry, dodging through the panicked students to reach Dumbledore. Dumbledore didn't seem to notice him. He turned to McGonagall.
"I want everyone to return to the castle instantly. Shield the gates and prepare yourselves for the worst. Phileas, Pomona, gather your students too."
Dumbledore struck out of the pub, cast the amplifying charm on his throat, and took a deep breath.
"Students of Hogwarts,"
he roared,
"keep your composure, get hold of yourselves, and follow your teachers back to the gates. Now!"
Removing the wand from his throat, he finally turned to Harry.
"Harry,
His blue eyes studied him for a moment.
do you trust me?"
"Yes,"
Harry said at once.
"Hide yourself then. Now!"
Before Harry had time to argue, someone gripped his arm and yanked him aside, saving him from a curse that could have hit him. "Harry, come on!" Hermione screamed. At the sound of continuous apparitions, Harry shook his head and plunged into the crowd. He couldn't leave, not when Dumbledore was going to fight. He couldn't let more people die for... "Harry!" Hermione followed behind him, her wand out as the first Death Eaters began to make their appearance. The street was suddenly swallowed in a thick cloud of dust. Someone screamed, and a younger student clutched at Harry's shirt, yelling about something Harry could not hear.
"Find McGonagall! Out of the way!"
Harry yelled back, pushing the girl aside as she looked around for Ron.
Where did he go?"
He shouted at Hermione just as a bombarding sound pierced his ears, and he stumbled over something hard on the pavement. The unconscious body of a student. Behind them, Scrimshaft's quill shop blew up with a thunder. Harry dropped to his knees, pulling Hermione down too. "He was right there! He...
"We'll find him,"
Harry told her, bolting up to his feet again and dodging a stream of light that pulled up dirt and smoke.
"Impedimenta!"
yelled Harry, his wand pointed at a large Death Eater who had cornered McGonagall at the entrance of the Three Broomsticks. The jinx hit the Death Eater in the chest, and he staggered back as McGonagall raised her own wand at him. "Patricus Totalis!"
she shouted. Harry ran to her, but a collapsed street lamp blocked his way. Another explosion threw him off balance, and he flew backwards, slicing his upper arm on something sharp. He hissed in pain and rolled over, covering his wound with his hand, the blood spurting out forcefully. Hermione had disappeared from sight too, and Harry struggled up off the ground, shaking. "They're at the gates!" someone screamed. "They're breaking into the castle!" A strong hand seized Harry's shirt and steadied him, turning him around. "Remus!" The order was here. They'd be fine. Remus pulled him to the side, and they ducked down again, dodging a stream of green light that hit the glass door of a shop behind them and shattered it into countless small pieces. "You're on!" said Remus, pointing at the bleeding wound. Harry shook his head. "I can't find my friends!" he yelled. "They were right here!" "Stay down!" Remus threw himself in front of Harry and blocked the curse that came to them like a large, shimmering wave. They crouched around the street's corner, leaning against the brick wall and covering their heads. Somewhere near them, a Death Eater could be heard laughing maniacally, throwing curse after curse with a deep, deranged voice. Harry felt dizzy, the pain of his sliced arm reaching all the way up to his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, and with a determined breath, he staggered back to his feet. "Hurry, no!" Remus shouted, but Harry had to find his friends. He couldn't let them die. He couldn't let them suffer. They had to reach the gates together, stop the intrusion. "Hurry!" Ron ran to him from behind a tree, his head bent, a deep cut over his eyebrow. Hermione was with him, covered in dust, her hair matted and wet. "Thank God!" Harry hugged them both tightly, and as the ground shook under them, he spotted Dumbledore and Tonks fighting off a pair of Death Eaters who were still masked. "Come on!" Harry shouted at his friends. The descending Death Eaters were countless. At the far distance, where the path to Hogwarts began, Harry could see a big black fire that resembled a mad snake. He could hear nothing but his own pounding heart when he finally reached Dumbledore. The dark mark spread and devoured the bright sky, turning the morning into a strange, frightening night. He had no time to count the students lying unconscious on the ground, nor the unforgivable curses he could hear being cast. But when he caught sight of the other teachers leading the younger students back to the castle, he felt a small relief wash over him. They'd be fine at Hogwarts. Slughorn stood there with Dumbledore and Tonks too, Ron raised a mouth continuously muttering defensive charms. Hagrid was nowhere to be seen. "I told you to leave! It's an order!" shouted Dumbledore as Harry ran to him. The line between the headmaster's brows dark in concentration, but Harry shook his head and stormed forward with his wand raised. "Hurry!" Hermione screamed at him. "No!" he muttered, knowing she couldn't hear him, knowing she couldn't understand why it was so important to stay to fight. This was happening because of him. Sirius had been killed because of him. Harry crashed on a Death Eater face first. The vicious-looking man smiled down at him with yellow, pointy teeth and grabbed Harry by the throat, growling like a wild animal. Harry was suddenly thrown to the ground again, the sharp rocks and the broken bricks piercing his back. The man straddled Harry and leaned over him, the stench of blood emerging from his mouth as he lowered his face to Harry's throat. The stupefy falling out of Harry's mouth failed to save him, and he steeled himself as he was held down and long nails dug into his flesh. A burst of blue light hit the Death Eater, and he rolled off Harry in pain. Slughorn had attacked him, using a curse Harry didn't know, buying Harry time, while more Death Eaters materialized out of thick smoke and aimed for the students. Harry didn't know how much time had passed when the students began to back down. He could see most of them fighting in groups, passing through the protective shield Dumbledore was struggling to uphold around them so they could get away and return to the castle. Dumbledore shouted something to Slughorn, and Harry couldn't hear what it was, but Slughorn gathered the rest of the students, grabbing them roughly one by one, and led them away. The Death Eaters were twice as many as them, and soon there were less than a handful of students left behind. The high street was in ruins, deserted and ravaged. The buildings on either side had been reduced to piles of rubble. Remus, Tonks, and Moody could be seen in the far distance, escorting the students back to the castle, shielding them from the attacks and urging them to move faster. When the last protective charm exploded to pieces, a sudden silence prevailed. The last thing Harry heard was Hermione's small gasp. It was Snape who stepped forward with his wand raised, expressionless and with firm, quiet steps. Behind him, the 3 broomsticks collapsed in ashes just as Dumbledore attempted to cast a spell and was disarmed. Time stopped. A few students who were still there stepped back as Snape moved closer, his eyes cold and empty.
"Severus,"
Dumbledore said.
"please."
Avada-kedavra! Green light shot from the tip of Snape's wand and hit Dumbledore right away. Someone screamed desperately, hopelessly, anguishedly. Dumbledore's body swayed and hit the ground. The scream continued, an inhuman, paranoid cry of despair that had no place in this world. It rang in his ears and covered every other sound.
It must have been coming from his own throat, Harry thought, for Snape turned to him and watched, and there was nothing but hatred on his harsh, pale face. Their eyes met, and then someone shouted, "Potter is here!" before a hand gripped his own and squeezed. The world went black and Harry's breath left him. Darkness pressed upon him as Harry was squeezed through time and space. Then he dropped on his knees and gasped. "Get up!" Hermione hissed. "Get up, quickly! We need to move!"
Where are we?
Ron asked, and then Harry was forced on his feet, stumbling forward, his throat clenching around his voice as someone's hand was still tugging and pulling him. They stopped in a narrow alleyway, and Hermione leaned against the wall, suddenly bursting into tears. She covered her mouth and nose with a hand, closing her eyes. "Oh my God!" she choked. "Oh my God!"
What the hell just happened?
yelled Ron.
Did you see what I saw?
"It's over," sobbed Hermione, taking deep breaths. Oh my God, my parents! I need to..."
Jenny's back there, all alone. Bodies everywhere. I saw it. They were killing students. She might have...
Ron shut his eyes, clutching his wand with a trembling hand.
Harry, you're bleeding.
He must have, because the pavement under him was red, but he looked at it as though it was the product of some peculiar art project. Should he be feeling pain? He supposed he should. The cut was deep, but his body wasn't his own, and his skin was surely a costume. Were he to take it off, there'd be nothing under it. No soul, no heartbeat, no emotions.
Where are we?
asked Harry, his voice barely above a whisper. He was surprised they heard him, and he fixed his eyes on the wall as though it held the meaning of life. "Muggle London," said Hermione. "We need to move, though.
Take us back,"
Harry said faintly in a trance-like state. "We can't. They probably..."
"Take us back, Hermione."
There was another protest coming from her, and then there was nothing, and at the same time there was everything, and Harry could barely hear himself screaming his lungs out. "Take us back. Take us back. Take us back. Take us back. Take us back. Dumbledore's dead. 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 Get us back. Fuck you. Damn you all. Get us back!" Ron pushed him against the wall, trying to keep him still, keep him from going.
"He killed Dumbledore!"
Harry shouted, thinking his throat would rip apart. There were tears on his face, and there was blood, too much blood. He was drenched in it, blood on his arms, his chest, blood on his fists, and he was shaking violently, doubled over. "Take us back, please take us back."
"He killed him! He killed... No! Calm down, Harry!"
Harry pushed Ron away and fell forward, landing hard on his hands and knees.
No, traitor, you... All along... You coward! No!
He screamed and screamed, his pain burning his chest and heart as he played the scene in his head again, nails scraping at the pavement, his tears forming small puddles on his glasses.
"He's dead,"
he said to himself, feeling close to losing his mind.
No. We need to find Jenny,"
Ron said, his hands cradling his head. "We can't. It'd be madness. Hogwarts is theirs now."
"She's my sister, Hermione. I can't just leave her there."
"Ginny is..." Hermione wiped her tears. "She's strong. She'll know what to do. She'll be fine. The one they're looking for is here."
"What if she..."
Ron didn't dare say it out loud. "We can't go back. It'd be suicide," said Hermione, and it almost sounded like an apology. Her voice was broken from the pain.
"The bloody snake!"
Ron yelled.
"Did you see it? Did you see? I knew it. I always knew it. What the hell did he..." "No."
Harry shook his head, pulling himself up and lurching back against the wall. He needed to go back. He knew he could change this. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. All he needed to do was find Snape. Severus. He needed to find Severus. Dumbledore was alive. Of course he was. This had to be some kind of sick joke. He'd find them and they'd explain it to him. This couldn't have happened. Severus couldn't have betrayed him. He couldn't. "If you leave me now, I'll die."
"I need to talk to Dumbledore,"
he choked, struggling to figure a way to solve this out.
If we go back... Dumbledore's dead, Harry! He's dead! It's over!
Ron punched the wall hard before looking away. He had tears in his eyes, too, and his jaw was tightly clenched. Harry wanted to vomit. He closed his eyes instead, feeling his legs tremble.
"Take us back, Hermione! Now!"
Harry's voice was rough and sounded strange to his ears. The terror he felt failed to numb the pain spreading over his chest. It was impossible to comprehend what had happened, and even more to believe that Dumbledore was dead. The Snape had done it. Polyjuice potion, it had to be. Someone had impersonated Severus to frame him. It was a joke, a trap. It was unreal.
Grimmauld Place?
Hermione asked, and Ron seized Harry's shaking hand. Snape knows how to get there, Ron protested.
We'll shield the building.
Ron nodded, and Harry let them take him wherever they wanted, for it didn't matter anymore, and even if it did, it shouldn't. Albus Dumbledore was dead, and the world had yet to end. The absence of remorse failed to convince Severus that he would somehow get over this unaffected. The killing curse burned his fingers as an invisible knife tore all the way through him and sliced his heart. It was over. Whatever was left of Severus's so-called good side had ended cruelly by the wand in his hand and the unforgivable on his lips. Everything that had voluntarily crept its way into his life was now dismissed, lost, forgotten. Not forgotten. Severus could safely state that not a single person on this earth gave a damn about him anymore. In the glimpse of a second, he had sacrificed everything, and he felt startled at the fact that he had something to sacrifice in the first place. The boy was there, and looked at him with terrified, betrayed, wide eyes, refusing to acknowledge the obvious, forgetting to protect himself and run, for orders never meant anything to him. And just like that, the last piece of Harry Potter's innocence was finally destroyed. Idiotic thing that it was.